weren't able to make it today. So let's talk a little bit about starting online small groups and why that might be a good idea. So here's our current situation. Coronavirus cases are high depending on where you live. Fear is high. So here's for instance, I'm working with a church in Minot, North Dakota. And in their county, they have 3 cases of coronavirus, 3. And right now they've opened for in-person gatherings at their church. They're about 40% of their normal summer attendance, but the 40% are not really the core of their church. The 40% are kind of people that found them online over the last few months that are ready to take a spiritual next step and are coming to church as a result of that. But so, I mean, even in a place where they have 3 cases, they're only getting 40% of their summer attendance. And that's probably the best I've heard. Most places are not getting more than 20%. If you guys are getting more than that, you could let me know in the chat. So we have this issue. I think the other issue is not just the fear of catching a virus. I think there's a significant concern with fear of blame. I was just looking on the Small Group Network Facebook group, and somebody had posted asking if anybody knew of a sample of a waiver that they could have potential small group members sign for in-person groups to exempt the church from any liability. Because nobody wants to be that church. Nobody wants to be the one that gets blamed because, somebody coughed and everybody got sick. Nobody. So, I mean, we live in a very difficult age. I mean, to the point that, Andy Stanley just announced this week that North Point is not going to open for the rest of the year. And then we can get into the debate of, who has more faith and who has more wisdom. We could get into the debate that I call it the maskites and the anti-maskites. But anyway, all of that. So only 30% of churches in the U.S. are open. People are reluctant to come back. Most places have less than 25% in attendance. North Point, like I said, won't reopen until next year. The spiritual need is great. I mean, you guys know, you watch the news, just the turmoil that's going on with the virus, politically, racially, economically. I mean, we are in a great deal of turmoil. And I think probably the last time our country was in turmoil to this extent was probably 9/11. And if you remember, 9/11, the Sunday after 9/11, I mean, it was as big as or bigger than any Easter Sunday. But now we've kind of had this 9/11, and either people can't attend or they're reluctant to attend. And where do they go? Because the spiritual need is very, very high. And there's some interesting things that are happening. I was listening to, you guys probably listened to Carey Nieuwhof, but he was interviewing Nikki Gumbel, who has the Alpha course. And Nikki Gumbel was saying that there's a pastor in New York who is starting a new Alpha course every day. And they'd always been reluctant to go online. Same thing with John Baker at Celebrate Recovery at Saddleback. Always reluctant to go online. And Celebrate Recovery is bigger right now than it's ever been. Working with a church down near you, Phil, in Columbus, Georgia. It's a legacy church, 400 people on a normal weekend. They went online, and their online attendance was 800 people. So there's definitely a spiritual need. But in this, I mean, it's great, the content that's going out. At one point, somebody said that the church was producing more media than Hollywood because all of our services are online and Bible studies and classes, and Hollywood was pretty much shut down. But content is one thing, but content can be passive. And so we're all small groups on the brain here, right? And so what we know is people need connection. People need community. They need a place to process, what's going on in the world and what they're worried about, or, without getting into debates, but just a place to get together for a group to take them back to the truth of God's word and to pray for each other and to, meet needs. We're all about that. So how do you do that when you can't meet? Or how do you do that when it's risky to meet? Or how do you want to do that because you don't want to get blamed if somebody gets sick in one of your small groups? So We're going to go online. All right, so benefits of online small groups. I blogged about it this week. There are no geographical boundaries to online small groups. So I have a friend, he's in Washington State, and he'd been looking for an excuse to get a couple of his college buddies in a group. So one of them's in California and one of them's in New York, and they can meet together in a small group. I mean, for us right now, I mean, there's someone on here from Canada. There's someone on here from South Africa. There's somebody on here from Alabama. So, I mean, we can go all over the place. In fact, I'll show you the map in a minute of everybody. I was just curious because, where you live in the country is kind of how you're having to deal with stuff. But think of it this way. The snowbirds, this is always an issue. If church is in Michigan or if a church is in Florida, there's always the issue of the snowbirds. Well, so in Michigan, they don't start till the snowbirds have left. In Florida, they don't start until the snowbirds have arrived, right? That's when you start your group launch. Well, if you put them online, guess what? You can keep your snowbirds. They can either connect with their group in Michigan or they can connect with their group in Florida, either way. So there's no geographical boundaries. There's no spread of disease, obviously. You're not limited by any time of day. So any time of the day that you want to jump into a meeting, people that do shift work, they get off at midnight, they could jump on and do a meeting in the middle of the night. Online groups tend to be shorter because you don't have the chit chat at the beginning. You don't have the brownies at the end. You have to bake your own brownies. But groups can be shorter. They can meet later. You put your kids to bed and then your group could meet. So there's some advantage there. There's disadvantage there because you can't have conversation, as an aside from the group. Easier to visit. So if you're the small group pastor, which you shouldn't be visiting all the groups anyways, you need to have a coach, and you're going to hear more about that later. But if you're a coach, well, you can just click, and go from group to group to group and pop in and see what they're doing. And just to check it out, and it's not easy. I wouldn't recommend recording it. That would make people feel kind of weird. It also provides a need for community and for growth. And I think that, we can kind of look at this two ways. One is it's a necessity for right now, because right now, in a lot of places, groups can't meet in any other way. But there's also an opportunity that you can connect with people that maybe would never darken the door of your church, or maybe people that are distant, or maybe it's a friend or a cousin or a friend's cousin that's from another state or whatever, but they can come in and join and connect. And so there is a need there. So there's a current necessity. There's a future opportunity, because this is the time to experiment. If you're ever going to experiment, I heard somebody say that everything's a startup right now. So if your church is a startup, you could try stuff and get away with it. And if it didn't work, you can say, oh, we only did that because of coronavirus. We're never going to do that again. Or you could say, I heard it on this webinar with this guy named Alan White. And I thought it was a stupid idea too, but he said to try it. You can get away with that. All right. So who is this Alan White? Who is he? My wife and I have been married for 20 years this year. We have 4 kids, Sam, Tim, Julia, and Jesse. So I had one that graduated from high school. I've got one that graduated from kindergarten this year. So we've got quite a spread. I've been in ministry full-time for over 30 years now, which makes me feel old, but oh well. I've coached over 1,500 churches, and I'm the author of 6 books. My daughter was asking me yesterday how many books I had, and I told her I have 6. Well, I have 6 books that I've written. I wrote the first one 4 years ago. So I have 6 books that I've written in the last 4 years. So my newest book arrived yesterday, is this one, Leading Online Small Groups, that I've already kind of polluted the internet about. And then the other one is a workbook for my original book, Exponential Groups. And so anyway, I'll talk about these more later, but a couple of the books that I've written, and I've got about 3 more in my head that I want to write. So hang up, probably not this year. I've done 2 this year. So, that's more than John Grisham. So I'm going to lay off a little bit. Okay. So who you are, this is where you guys are from. Now I only found a U.S. state and or U.S. map. So we have Ontario represented. We have South Africa represented. We have Washington, D.C. represented, but you're not a state, so you're not on the map. I decided to make the states green instead of red or blue because I wanted to avoid that controversy. But anyway, we're kind of, I guess we could literally say all over the map. We're not in any areas where we're exempt from coronavirus. And of course, looking at California and Texas, Florida, South Carolina, where I live, things are worse than they've ever been. And so the upper Midwest, I think, is the only place. Like, I asked my wife yesterday, do you want to move to North Dakota? Because they only have 3 cases in Minot. But anyway, glad to have all of you guys on here. And so Josh, I was talking to you earlier, is in my my hometown of Topeka, Kansas, but I see Elizabeth Scheib snuck in here. She is from my birthplace of Lawrence, Kansas. So rock, chalk, Jayhawk. The other thing I was looking at on the survey is to see what your experience was with online groups. So about 70% of you are leading an online group right now. So good job. Most of you have not been doing online groups for very long. 65% of you just started. About 12% of you have been doing it for a while. 25% are not yet. Some of you are launching for the first time. Some of you admitted, about 15% admitted that you were clueless, so you've come to the right place. And then I didn't see the other, so I don't know what your other answer is, but I'll look at it later. So my first small group, and it's funny thinking about this now, was in 1994 on CompuServe with a dial-up modem on my IBM 286 computer. It's where they sent you the DVDs in the mail, and then you had to install it, and you had to pay by the minute. And so our CompuServe group was limited to only 2 methods of communicating. We had a message board where we'd reply to each other, and we had a chat room where we could type. There was no audio, there was no video. So what's interesting to me about this first online group in 1994 is we had a guy named David who was from Southern California. We had a gal named Trish that was from Chicago. I was in Northern California at the time. We had a couple from Idaho. He was a mortician. He kind of creeped us out a little bit. Sorry, morticians. And then we had this guy named Greg that showed up at the group who lives in San Dimas, California. And so Greg was not a Christian, but we were in a Christian group. And the reason that he joined the Christian group was because on CompuServe at the time, you had to pay by the minute that you were online. See, this would cure a lot of web addiction if we had to pay by the minute. And so in our Christian group, we had a low, flat monthly rate. And so Greg was not interested in being a Christian. He joined the group because it was a deal. So here we are, doing our Bible study, having our conversation, talking about, sharing life and all of that on our message board and in our chat room with our dial-up modem. People are like, I tried to call you, Alan, all day and I couldn't get through. Well, I was on CompuServe. So anyway, I was single back then, so that's how I spent my days. But one day, my friend Greg posts, he said, Jesus died for my sin. Now, Greg was quite a prankster. And I thought, man, if he's joking about this, he has gone too far and I'm going to read him the riot act. So I opened up the message and lo and behold, my friend Greg on CompuServe that I had never met in person because of our little group gave his heart and life to Jesus Christ. So we all converged on his house in Southern California, and I baptized him in his jacuzzi because that's the Southern California way. But I mean, we're friends to this day, 26 years later. He was a groomsman in my wedding. I performed his son's wedding a few years ago. Trisha's still in the mix. We're all talking on Facebook now, but the mortician kind of went away. But anyway, that was my first online small group. So I may very well be the grandfather of online small groups. So there you go. That doesn't mean I got it all right, but I've done a number of online groups. Of course, all the coaching that I do these days is online, one way or the other. So what we're going to do in this webinar, and we better get to it. I'm talking fast because we have a lot to cover. So we're going to talk about using the right type of online group to meet different needs. We're going to talk about getting people to show up for their first online group, equipping new leaders for their first online small group meetings, coaching and training your online small group leaders, navigating online small group dynamics, and then taking next steps with online small groups. And then we'll have a little time. You guys had a ton of questions, so we'll answer questions at the end. The other thing I would say, because now you've seen where the chat window is, if there are questions that come up while I'm talking, go ahead and put your question in the chat. And if I don't cover it immediately, at least I'll come back at the end. And Josh tells us in the chat, now that I'm glancing at it, that Willow Creek is not going to gather until Easter 2021. So that's something. Wow. All right. So types of online groups, because we think online group, we immediately think Zoom. And Zoom's not even the only video platform that you can use. But that's not the only kind of online group. So sure, there are video groups, and there are a number of platforms that are out there. In fact, I'll share with you a document. It's not mine. It's one that Jason DeGraff did from a church in Rochester, New York, where he does a comparison of not every online platform, but a lot of them, and he gives some tips on group etiquette, stuff like that. I'll share that with you guys afterward. But yeah, video. So yes, there's Zoom, but there's also WebEx and GoToMeeting and Microsoft Teams and Facebook groups and Google Hangout, and there are a number of different video features. Some of them, also will give you a phone number so that you could participate by video, or you could participate by phone, depending on how you want to connect. I'm hearing a lot of people talk about Zoom fatigue. And at first I was like, Zoom fatigue, it's just the new replacement for the excuse, I don't have time for a group, because now everybody has time for a group. So now they say, oh, I have Zoom fatigue. But then I was thinking about this yesterday, and because I'm in a lot of Zoom meetings throughout the day. I work with one organization, and we have members of a team that are in 4 different time zones, but we're on Zoom together every day. And the thing I was thinking about it was that you don't typically look at yourself as much as you do being in a lot of Zoom meetings. I mean, for me, like, I get ready in the morning. When I was working at a church, I would go to the church, I'd be in meetings, I'd live my whole, do my whole day. I probably didn't look at myself again from, in the morning. And then you look at yourself at night. And Zoom, you're kind of looking at yourself all day long. And so we'll have people that, they won't use their cameras, and they'll be there, they'll be present, they'll talk, but they don't want to look at themselves anymore. The other way you can go are audio only options. So you can get a free conference call service, and people can meet by phone. I think the weakness of that is that people tend to interrupt each other more. Whereas if you have video, you can see, if somebody's getting ready to talk or whatever, provided you don't have 25 people in your group. Then they all look like little postage stamps on your thing. But sometimes online only works. If people are not confident in their use of technology, or if they have Zoom fatigue, you could say, that's all right. You could just meet with your group on a conference call and do it that way. A third option is what I call asynchronous groups. And an asynchronous group is similar to what I had on CompuServe, except today you could do it like in a private Facebook group where you don't meet by audio or video. You would just basically post the questions, and then, typical of what we do in Facebook, then people would just respond to the questions. That way, everybody doesn't have to be there at the same place, on the same platform at the same time, that as they go about their day, they can interact with each other. In fact, Jay Cranda, who's the online campus pastor at Saddleback, says that one of the things they do in getting people who are in their online service, which is everybody now, but he's been doing this for a while, but getting people from the online worship service into a group, that they would start with like a Facebook group where it would only be like a message board. And then eventually they would lead to something that was an audio call, and then they would go to a video call. But for people who travel, for people who have odd schedules, for people that are in different parts of the world, and you can't negotiate the right time zone without somebody being in the group in the middle of the night, an asynchronous group could certainly be the answer. There's some other platforms that are coming along. In fact, I have a meeting tomorrow with a lady that they do a digitally interactive platform. So we're all used to streaming video right now. We don't have to worry about all these DVDs. And but what this does is you don't have to worry about the study guides either, and it's not a download that you have to print out that's going to take all of your ink. It's all built into an online platform. So you watch the video, you comment on the video, the group sees your comments, they comment on the video. Now they encourage people to go ahead and meet. And this is something I looked into probably 5 years ago. And there wasn't a real strong demand back then, but now it's kind of getting that way, because even if you do have a book, if people aren't coming to church, how do you distribute all of your books? Unless everybody orders their own, and Amazon comes to their house every day anyway. So those are some ideas of different types of groups. Now within that, you could have what's the purpose of the group? Is the group a fellowship group? Is it a connection group? Is it a Bible study? Is it a discipleship group? Is it a support group? And again, you can connect in a lot of different ways. Are they based on a hobby or an interest? That part of it kind of goes with how we would normally do groups. I think the only difference is they wouldn't be able to join together to do the hobby or interest, but they could talk about how they wish they could, I guess. I don't know. All right. How do you get people to show up? So it's harder to get someone to an online group than to an offline group. All right. Now it's telling me my internet connection is unstable. Am I still coming through all right? Yes, no. All right. It's harder to get someone to an online group than to an offline group. So as much as we thought it was difficult before to have signups and then get people to go to somebody's house, it's actually proven to be more difficult for people to sign up to an online group and actually show up to an online group, which just seems completely backward to me. Because you think if anything else, it would be easier, and yet the reality is it's proven to be harder. So why? Well, first of all, the format's unfamiliar. Not everybody is as savvy as we are. They're not in Zoom meetings all day long, which I don't know if that's savvy or if it's cursed. I don't know what that is. But format's unfamiliar. It's a strange thing to them, going on the computer and talking to people. Some of them weren't bored like I was 26 years ago in CompuServe. The people are unfamiliar, so that could definitely be a barrier. So now I'm going to do something I've never done before with people I don't even know, and then maybe a small group is unfamiliar. I've never been in a group, much less an online group, people that I don't know. So it's kind of like 3 strikes, you're out. So what do you do? Well, this is the end of our webinar. No, it's not. All right, so here's where we're going to go. Some of the ways that we connect people into group are what I call passive recruiting methods. Passive methods include things like sign-up cards or emails. They email in that they want to be in a group, or they sign up. Online registration is passive. Group directories are passive. And what I mean is, it's kind of that thought of, if we build it, they will come, but it doesn't work very well. And you've seen this. People sign up for a group, and then half the time the leader won't call them, and then the ones the leader calls, half of them won't show up, and then half of those will show up for one meeting, and then they never show up again. And yet, well, it's efficient. Well, we may think it's efficient, but it's certainly not effective. So here's the webinar within the webinar, and that are active recruiting methods. And I'm going to give you guys all these slides at the end if there's anything worth having. But here's my webinar within a webinar of the best ways to get into a group. Number one best way to get into a group is to start the group. Because if you start the group, you're in. Second best way to get into a group is personal invitation. So somebody says, I want to do an online small group. And you say, well, who do you know? Well, it used to be, who do you know that's in the area? Who are your Facebook friends that are really friends that live nearby? Well, now the sky's the limit. You could do an online group with anybody you could figure out the time zones with. So personal invitation, who does the leader know? The leader invites a couple people. They invite a couple people that they know. And before you know it, you've got a group. And some of the hurdle of, I haven't been in a group, I don't know who the people in the group are. Well, some of that has been eliminated because they at least have a connection to somebody else that's in the group. And one of the things I talk about in my Exponential Groups book is that groups of friends tend to last longer than groups of strangers. So they start out friends, they're more likely going to stick. Now you're going to have people that, well, they want to be in a group, but they didn't get invited. Well, sorry, too bad. You can't be in a group. No, that's not true. So you go to what I call personal introduction. And typically with personal introduction, this would be the idea of having a small group fair where the leaders would all be represented. People could meet the leaders face to face and decide who they want to hang out with. Well, now they can't meet the leaders face to face. They can't even meet really mask to mask because, who knows what's going to happen. But I think you could still do personal introduction. And I think you could just ask your leaders to take out their phones and make a little video of themselves and introduce, who they are or what their group's about, so that people can watch the videos and get a little bit of a sense of who they are. It's not as good as a conversation, but at least it's a start. So start a group, personal invitation, personal introduction, and then if you get a handful of signups or you need to place people into groups, then you can do that. But you really have to have a leader that's motivated to follow up after a new person that they don't know, because it's going to take a lot more to get them into a group. So how else do you get them to show up? So number one is active recruiting methods. Step two, immediately follow up after sign up. So not just send them an email, give them a phone call, send them a note in the mail. Do something outrageous like that that's going to get their attention, because you really, really, really want them to be in the group. Build the relationship. Again, a personal note, a call, a text message, get to know them, maybe meet with them before the meeting starts if you don't know them. You want to send a reminder for the first meeting, every single meeting. Now, you guys signed up for the webinar, and if you signed up on Tuesday, I think you got 3 or 4 reminders from me, but look how many of you showed up. Whereas if, it's even a thing when you get into marketing. It's like you send a reminder an hour before the webinar and you get more people on the webinar. And so you want to send reminders. And so you need somebody that's going to be that tenacious, or if it's not the leader could delegate this responsibility to somebody else. And, it's kind of like a dog with a bone. They just won't let go. They just keep inviting and inviting. And then if they don't show up, or if they miss a meeting, you want somebody that will follow up afterward and see what's going on. It could be they forgot. It could be their internet was down. It could be that the dog ate the internet. You never know what their excuse is going to be. But you know how it is with leaders. Somebody doesn't show up with your group. What do you think? Well, they didn't show up because I'm a terrible leader. Well, in the history of small groups, I don't think any leader has ever called somebody and they said, hey, John, I was concerned because you weren't at the meeting. And John says, I wasn't at the meeting because you're really a terrible leader. I don't think that conversation's ever happened. But people get insecure. Well, they weren't there because, I think the enemy works on us that way. But they pick up the phone and they say, hey, we missed you. You're not calling to be the truant officer. Hey, we missed you. And they go, oh, yeah, I got busy, or I had a kid that was sick, or, some had to work late, these sorts of things. And, maybe there's a need that the group could help to meet. But again, we have to be, and we should do this anyway, even in our in-person offline groups, we should be tenacious. In fact, I encourage small group leaders, when whoever is on their roster, even if they rarely show up to the group, that person belongs to that leader. And they're their responsibility, whether they ever show up for the group or not, because they're not connected to anybody else's group. And so you want to pursue them, you want to follow after them, and almost like in a pastoral role, it's one of your sheep. And so you go that way. All right, so how do you equip new online group leaders? I know I'm going fast, but we got lots of questions and lots of things to talk about. So how do you equip new online small group leaders? Well, you have to do online training for online groups, don't you? And so I think you could do some kind of a basic training with them, give them the essentials of what they need to get started. And you could do it on a meeting like this. I would record a meeting like this, so then if they can't make it when it's live, at least they'll be able to, review the material later on. Make training videos as you're talking to your coaches, and you're hearing things that are coming up in the groups. Then make a short video addressing that particular problem. And if that could be one route. The other route would be you could survey your group leaders and kind of find out, kind of like I did with you guys, what are your biggest questions? What are your biggest needs? What are your biggest concerns? And I mean, you guys, there were, I think, 26 that registered. I mean, look at all of the questions you gave me. Now, some of them are common, some of them are already in there, but you gave me some good questions. So I used to do this with my leaders, and this is back in the day. I used to write a blog post every week, and they were all subscribed to the blog. At least they were supposed to be. And I would anonymously answer. I mean, I wasn't anonymous, but I wouldn't. I'm getting tongue tied. I wouldn't tell anybody who asked the question, because some of the questions were really dumb. Like, how do you meet all of the emotional needs of your group members? Are you kidding me? But nowadays, I wouldn't do the blog. I would just make a little video on your phone, push it out to them in an email, or get them subscribed to your YouTube channel, and address, whatever the issue is. But you can do some kind of training video or some kind of encouragement. You think about a new leader. You could talk about the time that you were starting a group and nobody showed up, or you're expecting 12 people and only 2 people showed up. And so that they know these things. If you're going to fight with your spouse any day of the week, it's going to be right before your group meeting. And somebody said that to me once, and I was so relieved. I thought it was just us. You want to give them some documentation, some things that they can, you can email to them that they can download and look at. You want to give them a copy of my new book. Hey. And so what I did, this is crazy. My idea to do this book started 11 days ago. And it's like an actual book with actual words on the pages. It's 167 pages long. So what I did was I took a book I wrote 2 years ago called Leading Healthy Groups. It's yellow and red on the cover. My kids call it the ketchup and mustard book. So I took that book, which some of it was a compilation of all these blog posts I wrote to my leaders. How do you deal with an overly talkative member? What do you do if nobody shows up? All of those common questions. How do you keep the discussion on track? I need to read that one, another one, just for this webinar. So I took that book and I applied the content and added some new sections specifically for online group leaders. So that is available on Amazon. But if you want to save some money, buy it from me. All right. Here's the number one thing of training a new leader is give them a coach. Because a coach can give them personal attention. A coach can give them specific training. And right now, you don't have the luxury of getting everybody into a room and training them. And even if you do, you don't know if they're paying attention, and you don't know if what you're giving them is what they need. But a coach can develop a relationship and give them what they need. So what do they need to know starting out in a new online group? Well, they need to know how to manage the tech. So some people are well versed in this. Some people, maybe they have an account through their business or through their work that they're available to use. They can use whatever is available to them. I don't think you need to go buy a lot of accounts for people. I mean, a lot of these things are free. If they have, a Google account, they can do Google Hangout or Google Meets if they have a Chrome account. So there are a lot of things. I know some places, they're buying a Zoom account and you have multiple hosts, and you could do that too. I would recommend for you, for your sanity, find somebody in your church who's really, really techie that understands all the ins and outs of this, and delegate all of these tech questions to them. And that will be a big help to you. And I know you guys, you joined the webinar, so you're up to snuff on a lot of this stuff. So what will they be studying? If it's an experienced group that's been around, then they should have options. If it's a new group starting out, don't give them any options. Choose the study for them, or do a discussion guide for your weekend service, because they've got enough to deal with inviting people and managing all of this. Don't, let them get lost. Well, we were going to meet. I found a couple people that wanted to meet, and we figured out Zoom, but we couldn't figure out what to study. And then by that time it was Christmas. You don't want that to happen. So tell them what to study. Give them a study. I did a study with a church in Washington State, because they've been in quarantine longer than any of us, and they're still in quarantine. And he did this study. It was called Cabin Fever. It was my idea, but I let him do all the work. And then I distributed it, but I took none of the credit. And it's still on my website. If you just go on there and search Cabin Fever, he talks about anxiety, working from home, parenting while you're working from home and your kids are home, He talks about fear. He talks about all kinds of different things. And it's just a little Zoom video. I will warn you, the first one's on anxiety, and I'm the guest that he interviews. So that might be the only downside of this thing. But there's a video that you watch, and then there's a downloadable discussion guide, and it's free on my website. And we just did that because, people were, it was going on and on and on. And we thought, well, let's give people, something where they can discuss quarantine and life in quarantine. How to gather their groups. Like I said before, make a list of your friends, and there's no limit. Who's on your Facebook? Who's on your Instagram? Who's on your TikTok, as long as we still have TikTok? Who could you invite that you already have a relationship or that you already know? And at least begin there. Some online group etiquette. So, mute your microphone when you're not talking. Wear clothes. And make sure your lighting's good so they can see you. I'm on some of these meetings and people are sitting in front of a window and it looks like they're in the witness protection program. So wear earbuds so you don't have feedback. Or if you have two computers in the same room or two devices in the same room, one of them needs to be muted, because otherwise the microphone from the other one is going to pick up and you're going to have this ridiculous feedback. So like I said, Jason DeGraff put together this great thing for group etiquette. And I put it in the back of my book, actually, but I'll give you that as a free download. You don't have to buy my book to get that. Sharing leadership. So how can other people help you? So they could lead part of the meeting, they could lead all of the meeting, they can handle the tech, they could send out the reminders, they can handle the follow-up. And I don't imagine that we're going to be, in quarantine and, living in isolation for the rest of our lives. So you could get people to plan socials, you could get people to plan service projects. Basically, a group leader can give away everything in the group, except they can't give away the responsibility for making sure that the group happens. But this is also a way to see who else in the group has the ability to lead. Because a lot of times, they look like a leader, but they're not a leader. But if you give them an opportunity to lead part of a discussion, then they may prove to be a leader, or they may be ready to do the whole thing. This isn't necessarily that we're going to kick them out. But, for the future of the group, the current leader may not be able to lead forever. The group may get too big and you got to subgroup. Well, when you subgroup in a house, you just go to a different room. But how do you subgroup online? You're going to have to go to a different platform. You can go to a different Zoom room. You can send them a new link. And there's different things you have to think about. And then, how do you facilitate a group discussion? And again, I don't think it's terribly different from what we're doing now. I'm in a lot of meetings where people's cameras are on and their mics are on and the kids are running in and out, and you just have a conversation. Other people, they want everybody's mics to be muted, and when you have something to say, you raise your hand. Maybe I'm not as polite as they are, but anyway, again, facilitating a discussion, you don't want them teaching. That's why I recommend using some kind of video-based curriculum, because then you know what's being taught in the group, and they're comforted by the fact that they don't have to teach. But a lot of the facilitation, unless you guys have a different experience, I don't find it much different from sitting together in a living room. And so you guys can argue with me about that if you want to. All right, coaching and training an online group leader. So your best training tool is a coach. And so your best coach is an experienced leader. So we all freak out and we go, oh no, coaching, I don't have any coaching, or it's terrible, or my coaches aren't doing anything. Put all of that aside. So when I started out coaching, we doubled our groups in a day. And the coaching for the groups that I currently had was poor because I was the coach. And so then we had twice the problem because we doubled our groups. And so I took all of the new leaders and all of the experienced leaders and I matched them up, because the experienced leaders had more experience than the new ones. So if you're going to start coaching leaders, start with the ones that are new, because number one, they need the most help. And number two, they don't know any different. They're just going to think whoever starts a group in your church gets a coach, and that's how things operate around there. Whereas if you try to impose a coach on an established leader, that's a whole other story. So anyway, okay, so the best training is from the person who is the most proximate to the leader when they have a problem. The best training is from the person who's the most proximate to the leader when they have a problem. It's not the most experienced person. It's not the most knowledgeable person. It's the person who's available. So if you have a coach that has some experience leading a group and they have a question or they have an issue that comes up in their group, that coach is kind of your first line of defense. And if the coach can't answer the question, then it should come to you. But that's kind of the best way, in my mind, to go. And I'm a big fan of coaching. And I would even say, if you took your energy that you're currently applying toward recruiting leaders and connecting people into groups, and you put that energy into coaching and training, you would get a lot further faster. And especially in this climate with online groups, because you could pretty much connect anybody anywhere. You know, there really is not a lot of limitation to who can and cannot be in a group at this point. All right, the frequency of coaching depends on the leader. So new online group leaders need more direction. They've never done it before. And you know, some of you are thinking, well, I've never done it before. Well, get up to speed really quick. You don't have to be a mile ahead of them, but you have to be at least a yard ahead of them, right? So new leaders need more direction. Experienced leaders need more support and accountability. In fact, I put it this way, and this is not original with me. This comes from the situational leadership model by Paul Hersey and Ken Blanchard, that new leaders need more telling. They need more direction. They need more instruction. Experienced leaders need more asking. How are you doing? You know, what's your next step in spiritual growth? You know, these kinds of questions. I have a whole course on coaching, so I can't get into all of that right now. But part of the reason our coaching and training fails is we coach and train all of our leaders exactly the same way. But we don't want the new leaders to get lost. So the least common denominator is the new leader. And then we wonder why our experienced leaders don't show up and why they're so bored. Well, we're taking them back to kindergarten. So again, start with the new leaders, give them more time and attention, enlist your experienced leaders, and at least they have an experience of a coaching relationship because they're coaching somebody. All right. Recruit somebody to address the tech issues. I mentioned that. So if you're techie, that's great. But I would, even with that, I would find somebody else to do the tech. Learn your leaders' needs. Again, through conversations with your coaches. You know, so how do you know what to train your leaders on? Ask them. I know. Write that down. Create short videos for training. Nothing is centralized right now. Nothing. So you have to think decentralized. And here's a little key. Not only do you have to decentralize right now, you never have to centralize this again. Saddleback Church, you know, they have their class 101 to 401, you know, the baseball diamond. It's been around forever. For the first time, Saddleback Church has put class 101 to 401 online. And guess what? People can participate on demand, and they are having a higher level of participation than they ever have. I mean, think about it. A person could become a member of your church at 2 o'clock in the morning. Why not? Or a leader, they could be laying in bed worried about something happened. I don't know. Are you guys still with me? Somebody say something in the chat.
Alan, you're muted.
I had a little glitch. The problem is I have a wife and 4 children, and they're all competing with me right now for bandwidth. So, you know, so anyway, don't get into these online groups. The tech glitches, it's a mess. You know, the expert can't even get his meeting together. Forget it. Run for your life. All right, here we go. All right, so let's talk about group dynamics a little bit here. And thank you guys for being patient. I appreciate it. All right, let's try to get this back to, I usually don't have those issues, but today I do. All right. So you'll find many of the same small group dynamics in online groups that you would find in offline groups. One of the questions that has kind of interested me over the years, people would say, well, if people are meeting online, how do you know that they're presenting their true selves? And my question to them is, how do you know that they're doing that in an offline group, right? People can pretend to be somebody that they're not. So many of the same dynamics you're going to, because people are people. So, I mean, you're going to have once you get the tech going, you'll be fine. Some unique issues to online, keeping people engaged and keeping them from being distracted. So, we have this thing, and on a phone, I'm just gonna confess, we have what's called a compulsion loop. I'll tell you my compulsion loop. Gmail, then Facebook, then Instagram, then Twitter. If I'm really bored, LinkedIn. And then I look at the traffic on my webpage. And then if I'm having people sign up for something, then I look at my survey. And then once I've gone through that, I go back to Gmail. That's called a compulsion loop. So if they're not using their cell phone for the meeting, they need to put it on Do Not Disturb. They need to, put it away. The other thing you want to encourage people, again, for the sake of the group, is to turn their apps off and to not be distracted. So somebody has a theological question that the leader and nobody else in the group can answer. Don't Google it in the meeting. I mean, have you ever gotten lost in a search? You don't want to get lost in a search. So you want people to eliminate as many other apps, as many other distractions as they possibly can. Now, people are worried about the big distraction they're worried about is, what if my kids interrupt the meeting? Well, here's what I tell people. Your kids are more important than your small group. Your kids are more important than your small group. So I work at home all day. I work in the corner of our bedroom. The bed's over there. The bathroom is behind me. And I work in this corner of my room. See, I need to have like a screen thing behind me. So you thought I was like in some fancy office. Well, I couldn't because I would get coronavirus. But anyway, I get interrupted during the day. Sometimes my child is having a problem. Sometimes in the middle of a meeting. Sometimes my child walks in and it's because they want to give me a hug. And sometimes my child walks in and they want to give me a cookie. So there aren't necessarily always bad reasons why you get interrupted by your kids. Now, one of the things I advise, and we did this in one of our very first online groups, when our son was small, we had to meet in our home. He had some special needs, and so we had some things there that he would need. But what we would do is we would put him to bed. We would put him to sleep before the group came over. And I mean, this went on for more than a year. And he had no idea what mom and dad were doing and all these people that were in our house after he went to bed. But it worked out pretty good. And the great thing is, with an online group tends to be shorter, 45 minutes to an hour maybe to do a discussion, maybe longer. It just depends. Well, you could meet at 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night. You could finish by 9:30. You turn your computer off. Guess what? You're already home. So you don't have to worry about, being out late because you're going to get up to, you're missing a few things. You're missing that meeting after the meeting that happens in the kitchen and, some of those kinds of things. Yeah, so put kids to bed. And if kids are up and around, you have to figure that out. Obviously tech issues, and that wasn't planned. It just happened on this meeting, but stuff happens. And so I think we just have to be patient. We may need to have, a conference call backup in case the tech doesn't work. In the early days of this, we'd use GoToMeeting. And, after a couple of times, if people can't get onto the meeting, you just say, let me give you my conference number. Because you don't want to frustrate people with the tech. I was meeting with a pastor yesterday, and his assistant sent me a link, and I sent the assistant a link. So we had two different Zoom links going, and I was in one meeting and he was in the other meeting, and we were both texting each other saying, I'm in the meeting, where are you, right? And this is not uncommon. And so when he finally came on, I said, well, this begs the age-old question, who's Zooming who? So anyway, there you go, back from the 80s. All right, so let's talk about taking next steps with online groups, and then we will get to questions. There's a lot to cover here. So how do you get online groups to continue? The big thing is you give them a next step. So you give them a series for the fall, and then in the middle of that, you want to give them a next one to go to, whether they do that in the fall or whether they do that in the new year. So you just want to give it, this is why 40 days of purpose, you have great for 40 days, and then it fell off the cliff and all the groups disappeared. Well, because nobody gave them a next step. And I'm not saying any of those people are dumb, because they're very smart. But that's one of the things we learned out of that, of how do you keep the groups going? You give them something else to do. Not Thanksgiving through New Year's, though. It's kind of like no man's land on groups. Should online groups move offline? Well, if they live in the same location, they could. If they've only ever met online, it's a little bit of weirdness, kind of like me and my CompuServe group meeting for the first time in Southern California. But it can happen. It doesn't have to happen. I don't think there's anything wrong with meeting online. When should online groups end? I think you go on to smallgroups.com and search group life cycle. You'll get about 20 different models of a group life cycle. The short of it is probably 18 to 24 months. But I mean, you guys know there are groups that last 20, 30 years. There are groups that meet for 6 weeks and they can't stand each other, and they should quit immediately. There's also, places where there's people in the group that are capable of leading groups, and maybe your group needs to shut down so that other groups can start. So, all right. Let me tell you about here's my commercial now. You've been patient. So I'm doing an online course because I'm seeing a lot of people have questions about starting online groups. And so I'm doing a 6 weeks course. It's going to start next Thursday. So we're going to talk about starting online groups, forming online groups that last, leading an online, how to lead a first online group meeting, coaching online groups, navigating online small group dynamics, and taking next steps with online groups. So obviously going into a great deal more depth than what we were able to do today. It's going to start the 23rd, go through the 27th on Thursdays, probably about the same time. You'll receive, so the 6 sessions are going to be live like this. I'm also going to put them up on my online course. So we'll record it. I'll put it in the online course, and then it'll be available there forever. And you can share it with your team or whatever. You'll get all of the slides, all of the outlines of the material, and then supplemental material, that'll help you get your group going. These 2 books that I mentioned earlier, I'll actually give you a copy of each of these. So my workbook, which Elizabeth, I'm not sure who else on here, actually contributed to my workbook, but it has examples and timelines and templates and case studies, and then also the online groups book. So you'll get both of those. If you bought them on Amazon, it would cost you $32. So that you would get that. So the cost for the course is $97 per church. So if you have a team that you want to share, either have you join live or do the on-demand, you're welcome to share it with them. If you register before we end today, then I'll give you a 1-hour coaching session with me, which it may be worthless, but I put $75 on it. So if you're doing the math, the course costs $97, the coaching session $75, the books are $32. So 32 and 75 is 107. So I didn't realize there's going to be math in my head. So 107, and the course is only 97, so I may have actually done that wrong. But anyway, I'll stick with it because that's what I did. So if you're interested in signing up, you can just go to alanwhite.org/starting online groups course, or if you go to the main page of alanwhite.org, you see over here on the right, there's a menu for online groups. You click that, you go down, starting online small groups live course, and you click that, and it will take you to the registration. All right, so some of you asked questions, and then we had the little Zoom glitch, and then all the questions went away. But anyway, so now you could use the chat to ask any questions you might have. I know we covered a ton of stuff, and my answer to all of the questions is going to be sign up for the course. No, it's not. But anyway, or you can unmute your mic and ask a question. We could be, like a true Zoom group here. I appreciate you guys staying with me despite the glitch. But as you're thinking of questions to ask, I'll just look at some of the questions that you asked. And then as you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat or just say, hey, Alan, I have a question. So somebody asked about the best number of participants. I'm one that I think a good group is probably 6 to 8 people. Or if you have more than that, you should subgroup to 6 to 8 people. So everybody has a chance to get their word in. And so this will be, important where the first meeting, everybody crowds in, and then you kind of look at who's in the meeting and pick your best and brightest and say, I'm going to need you to take part of the group next week. If they've just signed up to be online, they don't know you very well. They're not going to miss you too much because they don't know you. But I would keep it relatively small. I mean, there could be exceptions. And I don't want to put it in the vein of people feeling like you're going to split up their group, because there are some sensitivities about that, especially in North America, about people just they don't want to give up their group. I mean, we can call it birthing all we want, but what it feels like is a small group divorce. But if we say, well, this works best if we only have 8 people, then if it gets to be bigger than that, then we find an opportunity. All right, so Phil says, any thoughts on on an in-person group meeting that wants to involve a group member online who's out of town? So they're meeting together, and then somebody else is like Max Headroom in the corner. That's actually happened. And so people have actually done that. Now, obviously, and I've done this with coaching a few churches where they would be in the room and then I would be like at the end of the table on the computer. The downside of it is if they didn't care for what I had to say, all they had to do was close the laptop. So it's easy to eliminate me. But no, I've actually heard of that, of people, sticking together. I think it's probably better to have everybody's faces on the screen just because everybody can see each other. And in some ways, that's better than sitting in a living room, because sometimes you don't have a direct line of sight to everybody in the living room. But if they're on the screen, you can see all of them. But yeah, if they want to meet together and include somebody online, that could definitely happen. So video etiquette tips, I'll send you some things, my follow-up email. I'll also send you the recording of this, so you can show it to your staff and go, can you believe this guy? Anyway, I'll send you the slides as well. Best way to market online groups. So I think you can go 2 ways here, and they seem completely opposite. One way is that you get people to invite people that they know, and then they invite people that they know. So we talked about that before, about active methods. The other way, and this is the big one, that's going to support the active methods of recruiting, is you get your senior pastor to say something about groups in the weekend service, whether it's in person or online or both. But Saddleback, Rick Warren every week talks about making a commitment to Christ, giving, and joining a small group. And Saddleback went from 6,000 groups to 9,000 groups during the pandemic. So maybe they should be doing this webinar. I don't know. Actually, if you Google Jay Cranda, he's got a lot of great videos that go back a number of years since he was in this a long time. But if the pastor will say something about it. Now, how do you get your pastor to say something about it? Well, you do a couple of things. One is you put your pastor's teaching on the curriculum, and then he'll be in, because that's very popular. And the people want to hear his teaching. The second way that you do it, I've got a little download on my website. Maybe I'll just send you this too. It's called the Senior Pastor's Guide to Groups. And it gives reasons how groups will increase connection and growth and giving and serving. And it's not, it's not anecdotal. You look at transformational groups by Ed Stetzer and Eric Geiger. You look at, I remember the name of the title right now, but Robert Wuthnow's book. He was a professor at Princeton University, did this study 25, 30 years ago, and came to a lot of the same conclusions. So research tells you, well, and here's the big one if you want to get your pastor involved. Stetzer and Geiger say that if a person is in a small group, they will give 4% more of their annual income than a person who's not in a small group. So that should interest them right there. But I think the other piece of it is just with so much of worship services being online, people are not getting the chat in the lobby and in the parking lot and that connection of, they're sitting in the same row or behind each other. They don't get any of that, that a group is going to help in a large way. The other thing I would say with groups too, and this was even with a coaching group of pastors I did this year, was usually we would just kind of get right to the topic and go. But what we would begin the meeting, and sometimes it took 20, 30 minutes of our 1 hour meeting, was checking in to see how everybody was doing, what they were facing, how their families were doing, how they were coping with all of it, specific. And then we would get into the topic of the day. But it was just nice for pastors to have that check-in. Well, I would say very much so for your people to have that check-in of how are you doing? Because, if you spend any amount of time watching cable news, there's a whole world of things to worry about. You can worry about things you never thought about before. And that's the way the news used to be anyway. So, personal invitation, pastor pushing it. Then the other one, somebody else asked this, is to advertise beyond your church. Well, you could put something up about your groups, that your groups are available, and you can put it up on Facebook or Instagram, and you can target your community. You can target, you want adults, whatever ages you want, and you can set a budget and run a Facebook ad or run an Instagram ad of if you would like to connect, if you have spiritual questions, or however you would do that. And I'm not an expert in this. I dabble in it a little bit, but there are a few of you that are on this webinar because I ran an ad. And so I think that's another opportunity. But I would say, especially if you're doing an online service and people are tuning in from outside the church, online services have proven to be a pretty big thing in attracting millennials because they're watching the service without anybody else watching them. And that's working. Whereas they weren't showing up at church. And so I think there's some interesting things to try and some interesting things to learn during the season, other than just sitting around and saying, this is such a bummer, I can't wait till, it gets back to normal. I don't know what normal is going to be. But I think that, what I know is we have a mission. We have a mess and we have a mission. And our mission isn't going to stop just because we have to change our method. Our message still needs to go forward. So now I'm preaching, and you can say amen. All right. Any other questions? I'd be glad to take questions from you guys. I already got past the hour. So, you're welcome. We can officially conclude. That's always a good thing to have at a group meeting, the official conclusion if people have to go. But if you have questions, I'm willing to stay on. And you could open your mics up and just talk. I know you're all busy registering for the live online course. So anyway, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. And if you have questions, I'll stick around for a few minutes before I have to zoom over to Peachtree City, Georgia. That's my next meeting.
So Alan, what do you encourage people that really do experience Zoom fatigue when I'm on Zoom for school, I'm on Zoom. We've reached the point at the end of our semester where folks were a little bit more like, they just check out. They say, we've had it. And they just kind of hung it up.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And there are days that I feel that way. It's like, I don't even want to look at the screen. It's like, who am I? I want to read a book. I want to read a book I have to hold in my hand. I think that you could try a different format. So, they could maybe not do the screen, not have to look at themselves anymore that day, but maybe they do a group on a conference line. Maybe they do a group that, is like a Facebook group. It's asynchronous where they're interacting with people. And I wish I had more information about this digitally interactive curriculum because it's fascinating to me. And I knew about it 5 years ago, but I didn't really get that far into it. But the idea that you watch the video and you interact and some of those kinds of things. I know that right now media is getting into some like watch parties where you can watch a video together with a group, but they haven't figured out the book part of it yet or the discussion part of it yet. But I think that maybe try a different format. But I think that, there's an importance to connecting. There's an importance to discussing spiritual things and iron sharpening iron, all those great things that we know about groups. Does
One
that
of
help?
one of our millennial leaders talked about the Marco Polo app.
What is that? You mentioned that earlier.
If I understand right, how's that? It's everybody, like you said, makes a recording of themselves on their phone,
Oh,
and then everybody else can respond to that and kind of keep up with each other.
well, I'm gonna have to check it out.
I've never used it. Josh, have you used Marco Polo?
Yes, my small group uses Marco Polo to stay in touch with each other each week.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I'll have to check it out. And it doesn't involve a swimming pool.
No, it's not.
But it works okay. I mean, it works okay. Kind of, it gives a little bit of the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. I'm not even seeing things like somebody mentioned yesterday about sharing a reading plan on YouVersion.
Yeah.
And you can interact with other people on YouVersion. So I think there are some things like that that can become more important. I know way back when Jeff Surratt did a thing where he was doing back when Twitter was only 120 characters, he was doing a Twitter Bible study.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, then the whole world can see what you're posting. But I guess we're supposed to let the whole world know, right? I think there'll be some interesting ways to experiment this. I don't know if you could do, I interact with one team over Slack. I don't know if that would be a possibility. And of course, some things you have to pay for. And Zoom you have to pay for. I think you have a free account, but your meetings are only 40 minutes long. Which I've been in some meetings that were 3 hours that I wished were only 40 minutes long. So that saved us.
Our group has used Slack just to keep in touch. But Josh, on Marco Polo, you don't have to respond right away, right? Like those videos stay there and you can access them when you want.
Yes, that's true. Yep.
So it's not like a text message where you're like, I got to answer this right away. It's like I can wait until later tonight and then see what people are saying and watch their recordings.
Yep, that's right.
Okay. Because I've never used it, but I've heard about it. Okay.
And I think, again, these are kind of learning some of these asynchronous things that will benefit us later on down the road. Because now we're kind of in a period where, of course, some of us reopened and now we're, looking at reclosing. Some have already reclosed. But, we're getting into a season where people can't say I don't have time for a group because, they have time. So I think there are different ways that we can handle it, but I think it's an interesting season to learn some stuff. So thanks for Marco Polo. I'll have to check it out. I'm not up on everything. I kind of go in, I set up my username, and then I wait to see if it's going to be a thing. Because at least that way I have my username. So for instance, I went into Pinterest, set up my username, looked around for 5 minutes and said, I don't belong here, and left, and have never been back. So, anyway, maybe I'm missing out. I don't know.
Yes.
All right. Any other questions or thoughts?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Alan.
You're
Well done.
welcome.
Appreciate
It's good to see you guys. And I'll send you the recording and stuff with the glitch in the middle of it and everything. But that was just classic. I couldn't have timed that better. Except if I had my son run here and give me a cookie and a hug. Anyway, all right. Well, thank you guys. And if you have any other questions, offline, something to think of later that you just want to send me an email or whatever, I told you I have my compulsion loop, so I'll be checking my email. But anyway, thank you very much. And hope you guys do well. Stay safe, stay healthy. Just, I wrote last week that this is a season of planning in pencil and prayer, because we just don't know. So we'll see how it goes. And if you learn something great, let me know. And then I'll say I thought of it. No, I'm kidding. Bye.